American Literature Supplement, Lesson 8, Explorers and Politics Part 2, Daniel Boone. The Adventures of Colonel Daniel Boone, formerly a hunter, containing a narrative of the Wars of Kentucky. From the Discovery and Settlement of Kentucky by John Filson, as told by Daniel Boone of 1784. Curiosity is as natural to the soul of man, and interesting objects have a powerful influence on our affections. Let these influencing powers actuate, by the permission or disposal of Providence, from selfish or social views, yet in time the mysterious will of heaven is unfolded, and we behold our conduct, from whatsoever motives excited, operating to answer the important designs of heaven. Thus we behold Kentucky lately an howling wilderness, the habitation of savages and wild beasts, become a fruitful field. This region, so favorably distinguished by nature, now become the habitation of civilization. At a period unparalleled in history, in the midst of a raging war, and under all the disadvantages of immigration to a country so remote from the inhabited parts of the continent. Here, where the hand of violence shed the blood of the innocent, where the horrid yells of savages and the groans of the distressed sounded in our ears, we now hear the praises and adoration of our Creator. Where wretched wigwams stood, the miserable abodes of savages, we behold the foundations of cities laid, that, in all probability, will rival the glory of the greatest upon earth. And we view Kentucky, situated on the fertile banks of the great Ohio, rising from obscurity to shine with splendor equal to any other of the stars of the American hemisphere. The settling of this region will well deserves a place in history. Most of the memorable events I have myself been exercised in, and for the satisfaction of the public will briefly relate the circumstances of my adventures and the scenes of life from my first moment in this country until this day. It was on the 1st of May, in the year of 1769, that I resigned my domestic happiness for a time, and left my family and peaceable habitation on the Yadkin River in North Carolina, to wander through the wilderness of America in quest of the country of Kentucky, in company with John Finley, John Stuart, Joseph Holden, James Monet, and William Cool. We proceeded successfully, and after a long and fatiguing journey through a mountainous wilderness, in a westward direction, on the 7th day of June following, we found ourselves on Red River, where John Finley had formerly been trading with the Indians, and from the top of an immense saw this pleasure the beautiful level of Kentucky. Here, let me observe, that for some time we had experienced the most uncomfortable weather as a preliberation of our future sufferings. At this place we encamped and made a shelter to defend us from the inclement season, and began to hunt and reconnoiter the country. We found everywhere abundance of wild beasts of all sorts. Through this vast forest the buffalo were most frequent; then I have seen cattle in the settlements, browsing on the leaves of the cane, or cropping the herbage on those extensive plains, fearless, because ignorant of the violence of man. Sometimes we saw hundreds in a drove, and the numbers about the salt springs were amazing. In this forest, the habitation of beasts of every kind natural to America, we practiced hunting with great success until the 22nd day of December following. This day John Stuart and I had a pleasing ramble, but fortune changed the scene in the close of it. We had passed through a great forest on which stood myriads of trees, some gay with blossoms, others rich with fruits. Nature was here a series of wonders, and a fund of delight. Here she displayed her ingenuity and industry in a variety of flowers and fruits, beautifully colored, elegantly shaped, and charmingly flavored, and we were diverted with innumerable animals presenting themselves perpetually to our view. In the decline of the day, near Kentucky River, as we ascended the brow of a small hill, a number of Indians rushed out of the thick cane brake upon us, and made us prisoners. The time of our sorrow was now arrived, and the scene fully opened. The Indians plundered us of what we had, and kept us in confinement 7 days, treating us with common savage usage. During this time we discovered no uneasiness or desire to escape, which made them less suspicious of us; but in the dead of night, as we lay in a thick canebrake by a large fire, when sleep had locked up their senses, my situation not disposing me for rest, I touched my companion and gently woke him. We improved this favorable opportunity, and departed, leaving them to take their rest, and speedily directed our course towards our old camp, but found it plundered, and the company dispersed and gone home. About this time my brother, Squire Boone, with another adventurer who came to explore the country shortly after us, was wandering through the forest determined to find me, if possible, and accidentally found our camp. Notwithstanding the unfortunate circumstances of our company, and our dangerous situation, as surrounded with hostile savages, our meeting so fortunately in the wilderness made us reciprocally sensible of the utmost satisfaction. So much does friendship triumph over misfortune, that sorrows and sufferings vanish at the meeting not only of real friends, but of the most distant acquaintances, and substitutes happiness in their room. Soon after this, my companion in captivity, John Stewart, was killed by the savages, and the man that came with my brother returned home by himself. We were then in a dangerous, helpless situation, exposed daily to perils and death amongst the savages and wild beasts, not a white man in the country but ourselves. Thus situated many hundred miles from our families in the howling wilderness, I believe few would have equally enjoyed the happiness we experienced. I often observed to my brother, "You see now how little nature requires to be satisfied. Felicity, the companion of contest, is rather fond in our own breasts than in the enjoyment of external things, and I firmly believe it requires but a little philosophy to make a man happy in whatsoever state he is. This consists in a full resignation to the will of Providence, and a resigned soul finds pleasure in a path strewed with briars and thorns." We continued not in a state of indolence, but hunted every day, and prepared a little cottage to defend us from the winter storms. We remained there undisturbed during the winter, and on the first day of May of 1770 my brother returned home to the settlement by himself, for a new recruit of horses and ammunition, leaving me by myself, without bread, salt, or sugar, without company of my fellow creatures, or even a horse or dog. I confess I never before was under greater necessity of exercising philosophy and fortitude. A few days I passed uncomfortably. The idea of a beloved wife and family, and their anxiety upon the account of my absence and exposed situation, made sensible impressions on my heart. A thousand dreadful apprehensions presented themselves to my view, and had undoubtedly disposed me to a melancholy, if further indulged. One day I undertook a tour through the country, and the diversity and beauties of nature I met with in this charming season expelled every gloomy vexation thought. Just as the close of day, the gentle gales retired, and left the place to the disposal of a profound calm. Not a breeze shook the most tremulous leaf. I had gained the summit of the commanding ridge, and, looking around with astonished delight, beheld the ample plains, the beauteous tracts below, and on the other hand I surveyed the famous river Ohio, that rolled in silent dignity, marking the western boundary of Kentucky, with inconceivable grandeur. At a vast distance I beheld the mountains lift their venerable brows, and penetrated the clouds. All things were still. I kindled a fire near a fountain of sweet water, and feasted on the loin of a buck, which a few hours before I had killed. The sullen shades of night soon overspread the whole hemisphere, and the earth seemed to gasp after the hovering moisture. My roving excursion this day had fatigued my body and diverted my imagination. I laid me down to sleep, and I awoke not until the sun had chased away the night. I continued this tour, and in a few days explored a considerable part of the country, each day equally pleased as the first. I returned again to my old camp, which was not disturbed in my absence. I did not confine my lodging to it, but upon repose in thick canebrakes, to avoid the savages, who I believe often visited my camp. But fortunately for me, in my absence, in this situation, I was constantly exposed to danger and death. How unhappy such a situation for a man tormented with fear, which is vain if no danger comes, and if it does, only augments the pain. It was my happiness to be destitute of this afflicting passion, with which I had the greatest reason to be affected. The prowling wolves diverted my nocturnal hours with perpetual howlings, and the various species of animals in these vast forests in the daytime were continually in my view. Thus I was surrounded with plenty in the midst of want. I was happy in the midst of dangers and inconveniences. In such a diversity, it was impossible I should be disposed to melancholy. No populous city, with all the varieties of commerce and stately structures, could afford so much pleasure to my mind as the beauties of nature I found here. Thus, through an uninterrupted scene of sylvan pleasures, I spent the time until the 27th day of July following, when my brother, to my great felicity, met me, according to my appointment, at our old camp. Shortly after, we left this place, not thinking it safe to stay here longer, and proceeded to Cumberland River, reconnoit- reconnoit- reconnoitering what part of the country until March 1771, and giving names to the different waters. Soon after, I returned home to my family, with the determination to bring them as soon as possible to live in Kentucky, which I esteemed a second paradise, at the risk of my life and fortune. I returned safe to my old habitation, and found my family in happy circumstances. I sold my farm on the Yadkin and what goods we could not carry with us, and on the 25th day of September, 1773, bade a farewell to our friends, and proceeded on our journey to Kentucky in company with 5 families more and 40 men that joined us in Powell's Valley, which is 150 miles from the now settled parts of Kentucky. This promising beginning was soon overcast with a cloud of adversity, for upon the 10th day of October the rear of our company was attacked by a number of Indians, who killed 6 and wounded 1 man. Of these my eldest son was one that fell in the action. Though we defended ourselves and repulsed the enemy, yet this unhappy affair scattered our cattle, brought us into extreme difficulty, and so discouraged the whole company, that we retreated 40 miles to the settlement on Clench River. We had passed over 2 mountains, Powell's and Walden's, and were approaching Cumberland Mountain, when this adverse fortune overtook us. These mountains are in the wilderness, as we pass from the old settlements in Virginia to Kentucky, are ranged in a southwest and northeast direction, are of great length and breadth, and not far distant from each other. Over these nature hath formed passes that are less difficult than might be expected from a view of such huge piles. The aspect of these cliffs is so wild and horrid that it is impossible to behold them without terror. The spectator is apt to imagine that nature had formerly suffered some violent convulsion, and that these are the dismembered remains of the dreadful shock, the ruins not of Palmyra but of the world. I was solicited by a number of North Carolina gentlemen about purchasing the lands lying on the south side of the Kentucky River from the Cherokee Indians, to attend their treaty at Watauga in March of 1775, to negotiate with them and mention the boundaries of the purchase. This I accepted, and at the request of some same gentlemen, undertook to mark out a road in the best passage from the settlement through the wilderness to Kentucky, with such assistance as I thought necessary to employ for such an important undertaking. I soon began this work. Having collected a number of enterprising men, well armed, we proceeded with all possible expedition until we came within 15 miles of where Boonesboro now stands, and where we were fired upon by a party of Indians that killed 2 and wounded 2 of our number yet. Although surprised and taken at a disadvantage, we stood our ground. This was the 20th of March of 1775. 3 days after, we were fired upon again, and had 2 men killed, and 3 wounded. Afterwards we proceeded on to the Kentucky River without opposition, and on the 1st day of April began to erect the fort of Boonesboro at a salt lick, about 60 yards from the river on the south side. On the 4th day the Indians killed 1 of our men. We were busily employed in building this fort until the 14th day of June following. Without any further opposition from the Indians, and having finished the works, I returned to my family on Clench. In a short time I proceeded to remove my family from Clench to this garrison, where we arrived safe without any other difficulties than such as are common to this passage, my wife and daughter being the first white women that ever stood on the banks of the Kentucky River. On the 24th day of December following, we had 1 man killed and 1 wounded by the Indians, who seemed determined to persecute us for erecting this fortification. On the 14th day of July of 1776, 2 of Colonel Calloway's daughters and 1 of mine were taken prisoner near the fort. I immediately pursued the Indians with only 8 men, and on the 16th overtook them, killed 2 of the party, and recovered the girls. The same day on which this attempt was made, the Indians divided themselves into 2 different parties and attacked several forts, which were shortly before this time erected, doing a great deal of mischief. This was extremely distressing to the new settlers. The innocent husbandman was shot down while busy cultivating the soil for his family's supply, and most of the cattle around the stations were destroyed. They continued their hostilities in this manner until the 15th of April of 1777, when they attacked Boonesboro with a party of above 100 in number, killed one man and wounded four. Their loss in this attack was not certainly known to us. On the 4th day of July following, a party of about 200 Indians attacked Boonesboro, killed one man, and wounded two. They besieged us 48 hours, during which time 7 of them were killed, and at last, finding themselves not likely to prevail, they raised the siege and departed. The Indians had disposed their warriors in different parties at this time, and attacked the different garrisons, to prevent their assisting each other, and did much injury to the distressed inhabitants. On the 19th day of this month, Colonel Logan's fort was besieged by a party of about 200 Indians. During this dreadful siege they did a great deal of mischief, distressed the garrison, in which there were only 15 men, killed 2 and wounded 1. The enemy's loss was uncertain, from the common practice which the Indians have of carrying off their dead in the time of battle. Colonel Harrod's fort was then defended by only 65 men, the Boonesboro by 22, there being no more forts or white men in the country, except at the falls, a considerable distance from these, and all taken collectively were but a handful to the numerous warriors that were everywhere dispersed through the country, intent upon doing all the mischief that savage barbarity could invent. Thus we passed through a scene of suffering that exceeded description. On the 25th of this month, a reinforcement of 45 men arrived from North Carolina, and about the 20th of August following, Colonel Bowman arrived with 100 men from Virginia. Now we began to strengthen, and from hence, for the space of 6 weeks, we had skirmishes with Indians in one quarter or another almost every day. The savages now learned the superiority of the long knife, as they call the Virginians, by experience, being out-generaled in almost every battle. Our affairs began to wear a new aspect, and the enemy, not daring to venture on open war, practiced secret mischief at times. On the 1st day of January, 1778, I went with a party of 30 men to the Blue Licks, on Licking River, to make salt for the different garrisons in the country. On the 7th day of February, as I was hunting to procure meat for the company, I met with a party of 102 Indians and 2 Frenchmen on their march against Boonesboro, that place being particularly the object of the enemy. They pursued, took me, and brought me on the 8th day to the Licks, where 27 of my party were, 3 of them having previously returned home with the salt. I, knowing it was impossible for them to escape, capitulated with the enemy, and at a distance in their view, gave notice to my men of their situation, with orders not to resist, but surrender themselves captives. The generous usage the Indians had promised before in my capitulation was afterwards fully complied with, and we proceeded with them as prisoners to Old Chillicothe, the principal Indian town on the Little Miami, where we arrived after an uncomfortable journey in very severe weather on the 18th day of February. We received as good a treatment as prisoners could expect from savages, and on the 10th day of March following, I and 10 of my men were conducted by 40 Indians to Detroit, where we arrived the 13th day, and were treated by Governor Hamilton, the British commander at the post, with great humanity. During our travels the Indians entertained me well, and their affection for me was so great that they utterly refused to leave me there with the others, although the governor offered them 100 pounds sterling for me, on purpose to give me a parole to go home. Several English gentlemen there, being sensible of my adverse fortune, and touched with human sympathy, generously offered a friendly supply for my wants, which I refused, with many thanks for their kindness, adding that I never expected it would be in my power to recompense such unmerited generosity. The Indians left my men in captivity with the British at Detroit, and on the 10th day of April brought me towards Old Chillicothe, where we arrived on the 25th day of the same month. This was a long, fatiguing march through an exceedingly fertile country, remarkably for fine springs and streams of water. At Chillicothe I spent my time as comfortably as I could expect, was adopted, according to their custom, into a family where I became a son, and had a great share in the affection of my new parents, brothers and sisters, and friends. I was exceedingly familiar and friendly with them, always appearing as cheerful and satisfied as possible, and they put great confidence in me. I often went a hunting with them, and frequently gained their applause for my activity at our shooting matches. I was careful not to exceed many of them in shooting, for no people are more envious than they in this sport. I could observe in their countenances and gestures the greatest expressions of joy when they exceeded me, and when the reverse happened, of envy. The Shawneese king took great notice of me, and treated me with profound respect and entire friendship, often entrusting me to hunt at my liberty. I frequently returned with the spoils of the woods, and as often presented some of what I had taken to him expressly of duty to my sovereign. My food and lodging were in common with them, not so good indeed as I could desire, but necessity made everything acceptable. I now began to meditate an escape, and carefully avoided their suspicions, continuing with them at Old Chillicothe until the first day of June following. Then was taken by them to the salt springs at Secotha, and kept there, making salt 10 days. During this time I hunted some for them, found the land, a great extent about this river, to exceed the soil of Kentucky, if possible, and remarkably well watered. When I returned to Chillicothe, alarmed to see 450 Indians, at their choicest warriors, painted and armed in a fearful manner, ready to march against Boonesboro, I determined to escape the first opportunity. On the 16th, before sunrise, I departed in the most secret manner, and arrived at Boonesboro on the 20th, after a journey of 160 miles, during which I had but one meal. I found our fortress in bad state of defense, but we proceeded immediately to repair our flanks, strengthen our gates and posterns, and form double bastions, which we completed in 10 days. In this time we daily expected the arrival of the Indian army, and at length one of my fellow prisoners, escaping from them, arrived, informing us that the enemy had an account of my departure, and postponed their expedition 3 weeks. The Indians had spies out viewing our movements, and were greatly alarmed at our increase in number and fortifications. The grand councils of the nation were held frequently, and with more deliberation than usual. They evidently saw the approaching hour when the Long Knife would dispose them of their desirable habitation, and anxiously concerned for futurity, determined utterly to extirpate the whites out of Kentucky. We were not intimidated by their movements, but frequently gave them proof of our courage. On the 8th of August the Indian army arrived, being 444 in number, commanded by Captain Duquesne, 11 other Frenchmen, and some of their own chiefs, and marched up within view of our fort, with British and French colors flying, and having sent a summons to me in his Britannic Majesty's name, to surrender the fort. I requested 2 days' consideration, which was granted. It was now a critical period with us. We were a small number in the garrison. A powerful army was before our walls, whose appearance proclaimed inevitable death, fearfully painted, and marked their footsteps with desolation. Death was preferable to captivity. If taken by storm, we must inevitably be devoted to destruction. In this situation, we concluded to maintain our garrison, if possible. We immediately proceeded to collect what we could of our horses and our cattle, and bring them through the postern into the fort. And in the evening of the 9th I returned answer that we were determined to defend our fort while a man was living. Now, said I to the commander, who stood attentively hearing my sentiments, we laugh at all of your formidable preparations, but thank you for giving us notice and time to provide for our defense. Your efforts will not prevail, for our gates shall forever deny you admittance. Whether this answer affected their courage or not, I cannot tell. But contrary to our expectations, they formed a scheme to deceive us, declaring it was their orders from Governor Hamilton to take us captive and not to destroy us. But if 9 of us would come out and treat with them, they would immediately withdraw their forces from our walls and return home peaceably. This sounded grateful in our ears, and we agreed to the proposal. We held the treaty within 60 yards of the garrison, on purpose to divert them from a breach of honor, as we could not avoid suspicion of the savages. In this situation the articles were formally agreed to and signed, and the Indians told us it was customary with them, on occasions, for 2 Indians to shake hands with every white man in the treaty, as an evidence of entire friendship. We agreed to this also, but were soon convinced their policy was to take us prisoners. They immediately grappled us, but although surrounded by hundreds of savages, we extricated ourselves from them, and escaped all safe into the garrison, except one that was wounded through a heavy fire from their army. They immediately attacked on every side, and a constant heavy fire ensued between us day and night for the space of 9 days. In this time, the enemy began to undermine our fort, which was situated 60 yards from Kentucky River. They began at the watermark and proceeded in the bank some distance, which we understood by their making of water muddy with the clay, and we immediately proceeded to disappoint their design by cutting a trench across their subterranean passage. The enemy, discovering our countermine by the clay we threw out of the fort, desisted from the stratagema, and experience now fully convincing them that neither their power nor policy would effect their purpose, on the 20th day of August they raised the siege and departed. During this dreadful siege, which threatened death in every form, we had 2 men killed and 4 wounded, besides a number of cattle. We killed of the enemy 37 and wounded a great number. After they were gone, we picked up 125-pound weight of bullets, besides what stuck in the logs of our fort, which certainly is great proof of their industry. Colonel Harrod proposed to mount the number of horses and furiously to rush upon the savages, who at this time fought with remarkable fury. This desperate step had a happy effect, broke their line of battle, and the savages fled on all sides. In these 2 battles we had 9 killed and 1 wounded. The enemy's loss uncertain, only 2 scalps being taken. Here, to avoid an inquiry into my conduct, the reader being before informed of my bringing my family to Kentucky, I am under the necessity of informing him that during my captivity with the Indians, my wife, who despaired of ever seeing me again, expecting the Indians had put a period on my life, oppressed with the distresses of the country, and bereaved of me, her only happiness, had, before I returned, transported my family and goods on horses through the wilderness amidst a multitude of dangers to her father's house in North Carolina. Shortly after the troubles at Boonesboro, I went to them, and lived peaceably there until this time. The history of my going home and returning with my family forms a series of difficulties, an account of which would swell a volume, and being foreign to my purpose, I shall purposely omit them. I settled my family in Boonesboro once more. The winter soon came on, and was very severe, which confined the Indians to their wigwams. The severity of this winter caused a great difficulty in Kentucky. The enemy had destroyed most of the corn the summer before. This necessary article was scarce and dear, and the inhabitants lived chiefly on the flesh of buffalo. The circumstances of many were very lamentable. However, being a hardy race of people, and accustomed to difficulties, the necessities they were wonderfully supported through all their sufferings until the ensuing fall, when we received abundance from the fertile soil. The Indians continued their hostilities after many months of difficult fighting. Some of the Indian nations immediately desired peace, to which the present they seemed universally disposed, and are sending ambassadors to General Clark at the Falls of the Ohio with the minutes of their council, a specimen of which in the minutes of the Piankashaw Council is subjoined. To conclude, I can now say I have verified the saying of an old Indian who signed Colonel Henderson's deed, taking me by the hand at the delivery thereof. "Brother," says he, "we have given you a fine land, but I believe you will have much trouble in settling it. My footsteps have often been marked with blood, and therefore I can truly subscribe to its original name. 2 darling sons and a brother have I lost by savage hands, which have also taken from me 40 valuable horses and abundance of cattle. Many dark and sleepless nights have I been in companion for owls, separated from the cheerful society of men, scorched by the summer's sun, and pinched by the winter's cold, an instrument ordained to settle the wilderness. But now the scene is changed. Peace crowns the sylvan shade. What thanks, what ardent and ceaseless thanks, are due to all superintending Providence, which has turned a cruel war into peace, brought order out of confusion, made the fierce savages placid, and turned away their hostile weapons for our country. May the same Almighty goodness banish the accursed monster War from all lands, with her hated associates, rapine and insatiable ambition. Let peace, descending from her native heaven, bid her olives spring amidst the joyful nation, and plenty in league with commerce scatter blessings from her copious hand. This account of my adventures will inform the reader the most remarkable events of this country. I now live in peace and safety, enjoying the sweet of liberty, and the bounties of Providence with my own fellow sufferers in this delightful country, which I have seen purchased with a vast experience of blood and treasure, delighting in the prospect of its being in a short time one of the most opulent and powerful states on the continent of North America, which with the love and gratitude of my countrymen I esteem a sufficient reward for all of my toil and dangers. Fayette County, Kentucky, Daniel Boone.